am very thrilled to be here. I'm especially excited to talk about academic integrity and what we can learn from it. I'm particularly pleased because, like many Americans, I trace part of my heritage back to Ireland, and depending on what happens in November, I might need you all to take me back. So thank you very much. I also want to offer thanks to the Quality and Qualifications folks and the National Integrity Network. And also for Sue, who has been very patient with me while I've tried to figure everything out from you all. One of the great things about the pandemic, most of the things about the pandemic has been terrible, but I really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate more freely with people from around the world and to not worry about if I've had onions for breakfast or even if I'm wearing pants. So thank you all for being here. So I'm going to start by talking about what academic integrity is. And it's a really interesting feature of academic integrity that when you say that that's the work that you do, the first thing that comes to mind for most people is exactly the opposite of academic integrity. I usually say, I work in academic integrity, and people say, oh, that's cheating. And I say, no, that's exactly the opposite of cheating. And why would you say that? But it's a feature of our work that people think plagiarism, people think bespoke essays, they think everything but what it is that we're actually trying to promote. And so the first seed I would like to plant with you is the idea that we will accomplish more with academic integrity if we focus on the positive than the negatives. And I've included this memorable image to help you keep that in the fore. I'm going to give you a working definition, and this is not the be-all and end-all of definitions. This is just something that you can keep in your head as to know what I'm speaking about. I would encourage every single person who is on this call to go back to your home institution and try to work out what your actual definition of academic integrity is, and it should depend on your agreed upon principles and values. And it's really important that each place does that for themselves, because that's the way that you get people to buy into academic integrity, is to tie it to things that people already agree are important. You might base it on the Center for Academic Integrity's fundamental values, or you can choose your own principles and values like honesty, trust, independence, beneficence, or whatever it is that your institution values. For years and years, when I described academic integrity, I wanted to give some way of grounding it because it is an abstract concept. And so I would use the metaphor of a suspension bridge, because people can readily understand how with a suspension bridge, all of the cables, all of the supports, all of the underlying foundation, all of those things are important. And you have to build it in such a way so that when there are unusual circumstances, when there are high winds, when there is a storm, the structure can withstand the circumstances, and they need to be there. They need to be there ahead of the emergency. You can't wait until there's a crisis and then try to do something about it. And then COVID-19 hit, and it became immediately apparent to me that this was a better metaphor because, unlike the bridge metaphor, what we're seeing with COVID-19 is that same thing. You have to build the network, you have to build the foundation, you have to build the supports, but you have to build all of those things with people. So I immediately adopted that, and I would encourage you to at least think about it, have it be a framework for thinking. I'm going to talk about the relationship of academic integrity to crises. And so I'm going to offer you some definitions of crises that are commonly understood. The first one is a time of disagreement, confusion, or suffering. That's the Cambridge Online Dictionary. I use the Cambridge Dictionary most. Another one is a time of intense difficulty or danger. But the one that I'd like to draw your attention to is the one from Collins Online, which says that a crisis is a crucial stage or a turning point in the course of something, especially a sequence of events. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute. So it has been common for several decades in the United States to use this expression to say that the word crisis comes from the words for danger and the words for opportunity. And this is very popular in self-help books and professional development and leadership manuals. It turns out, like many of the things that we use in those things, it's actually not true. There's a greater definition. I'm sure you guys will have access to these slides. There's a explication of what those symbols actually mean. But for our purposes, I'm going to go ahead and refer to this anyway, because like many things, even if its origins aren't aren't what they should have been, it's still a very useful concept to think about crises in terms both of the danger that they represent and the way that they offer us an opportunity. And I would say an opportunity especially to notice things that usually go unnoticed. In a crisis, you focus on the things that are most important because everything matters. And that's what we're seeing now, both in terms of academic integrity and in terms of the pandemic. The first lesson that I have seen that transfers across both the pandemic and into our work with academic integrity is that we have to, as organizations and as communities, we have to affirm, and we also have to tend to our commitment to distinguishing truth from falsehood. We are in an unprecedented age of information right now, but we're also in an unprecedented age of disinformation and a time at which it's possible to find things that confirm almost whatever belief a person wants to have. And I would submit to you that that is a really dangerous environment to be in a crisis, because it is very important that we all know where we can turn to for credible information. And that's the sort of thing that we absolutely have to establish ahead of the crisis, because in the crisis, everybody is going to be casting about for whatever information that can find. And if we already know who the sources are that can be relied upon, then we are in a much stronger position as to figuring out what the boundaries of the situation, what the characteristics of the situation actually are. We have to do that with respect to things like plagiarism, things like bespoke essays, things like machine writing, because most of those things are relatively unfamiliar to the people that are having to navigate them. And so it's really important to know who our credible experts are. And by the way, he's not one. The second lesson is that the need for honesty and the need for credibility has to go beyond the individual. It has to be embedded in our organizations. It has to be embedded in our communities. It has to be structural so that we actually reward the sources of information that are credible and have a mechanism for adjudicating the sources that are not. And one more step in that applies specifically to academic integrity as well as the pandemic is that we have to be able to share. There has to be safety in sharing information, even when we know that the findings will not be well received. The people who first broke the news about the coronavirus were vilified, and an information battle ensued about whether or not that was true or whether it was false. And we lost valuable time when the people who were trying to give us the truth weren't allowed to do so. And even though it sounds very dramatic, it's much the same with academic integrity. One of the things that happens when people first discover that they have a lot of cheating in their school is that they have a discussion about whether or not they're going to let that be known. And one of the challenges that we face in academic integrity is that it's very hard to address a problem when nobody wants to talk about the problem openly. And I hope that we can learn from the lessons that we're seeing with respect to COVID-19 and say, you know what, we just have to bite the bullet, and we have to go forward and make this information known, even though there are going to be people who think that we should keep it quiet rather than addressing it. The next lesson is figuring out ahead of time what constitutes an actual threat. We have to be able to separate things that are actually worth our time addressing from things that are predictable facets of learning. For instance, when we have incoming students who have not been evaluated in higher education environments, they are going to make some mistakes with respect to citation that reflect the things that they probably got away with when they were in their previous secondary schools. So we have to know that we have to know how to distinguish a genuine mistake and an opportunity for learning from something that is more insidious and something that we need to address as cheating. And this is really important because when people call everything cheating, when they say, oh, this person didn't cite correctly, they don't have their parentheses in the right place, or they have left out the year or something like that, those are just citation errors. And even when people summarize and don't realize they have to put the in-text citation in a particular place, but they've indicated that it came from somewhere else. Those are issues that we need to separate from the things that are genuinely academic misconduct. And for the people who say that everything is plagiarism, we lose the signal for the noise when we do that. So we need to know ahead of time what is actually going to constitute a threat. Same for something like COVID-19. And then the corollary of that is that we have to remain ready to redefine what constitutes a threat as new threats emerge. And that's something that we've seen throughout the history of academic integrity work, is that we think we know what plagiarism is. You know, for years and years it was cut and paste, and then as we got better at detecting cut and paste plagiarism, people started saying, okay, well, if you're going to find it this way, I'm just going to go hire somebody to write the essay for me. Right? And we weren't prepared for that when it first emerged, and we thought it wasn't a great threat. And because of the situation, because it was easy to contract with people all the way around the world, we had to redefine what the actual threat was going to look like. We don't know what the next thing to be a danger to us is, and that's part of this work, is being willing to keep an eye out and see what might happen next at the same time as we, as I said in lesson 3, as the same thing as we are looking at the things that we've already defined as dangerous and things that we have to keep a hand on. All right, lesson 5, and this is the one, I think this is the thing that jumped out at me first as being parallel between academic integrity and the coronavirus, is that when we work with people on developing communities of integrity, we need to be ready to do things that we don't think we should have to do because they should already know. That's one of the biggest things that happens when I go and work with schools face to face, is I say, okay, you know, I think it would help if you guys talk to your students about this. And they say, oh, our students should already know that. And I say back to them, I believe you that they maybe should already know that, but we know from years and years of work that they often don't know how to do that. So to paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld, who is not somebody I usually paraphrase, we go to work with the students that we have, not the students that we think that we should have. And that's the same with things like hand washing. When they first came out with the hand washing guidelines, people kind of rolled their eyes and said, you know, I'm 40 years old, I know how to wash my hands, but it turns out that we weren't washing our hands thoroughly enough. And it's the same with citation, is people think that they know, they don't know. So let's meet them where they are, not where we think that they should be. All right, lesson 6. Crises reveal what's wrong with us already, right? We are having a lot of discussions in the United States. I know that this is happening in the UK and elsewhere about things like structural racism. And a lot of the people who are central to those discussions are saying, you know, these things aren't new. What's new is that we're seeing them. And that is absolutely the case with a lot of the deficits that we saw with COVID-19. As soon as the illness hit, we saw how desperately insufficient some of our workplaces were, how fragile some of our supply chains were. And the same thing happens with academic integrity, is when you start to examine why we are having such a crisis, and you start to see practices, for instance, like giving the same exam for a decade, right? And when you see it, you go, oh, you know, I understand that the students shouldn't cheat, but also we shouldn't give the same exam question for 10 years in a row. And so it's very useful for us to use a crisis as a lens to look at the things that the crisis reveals and examine them to see if maybe the practice itself was lacking. One of the things that I love to do with teachers is have them explain the reasons for particular evaluations. And sometimes the reason is because this is what we've always done. And if that's the only reason that they can articulate, then it's a good inflection point to say, you know, perhaps if you can't articulate a reason that this is necessary, perhaps it isn't necessary. And we have an opportunity to revise our teaching. And actually, that's what academic integrity turns out to be largely about, is reinvigorating teaching and learning so that there is less incentive to cheat and also less reward for having cheated. All right, lesson 7. Global crises are always also local. And this is what I was alluding to at the beginning when I said that I encouraged you to build your academic integrity programs and your academic integrity communities on your own local values. Academic integrity works only when you have sufficient buy-in. You cannot really impose integrity on people. You can establish boundaries and you can establish constraints so that it's difficult to cheat, but if you actually want to instill integrity, you have to get people to understand the value of integrity and want to be part of a community that shares values. And so it is critical. It is probably job one to figure out what your local values are, and then figure out how you can recruit leaders from your various constituencies, including, very importantly, including students, so that people want to be part of this effort. And I have some examples that I can share. I don't have enough time to do it now, but I have examples I can share of schools where they've been very successful at getting the students to take the lead in these efforts. But whether it's the students or it's the teachers or it's the leadership, everyone needs to be in conversations, and the local values need to be at the fore so that people actually understand why and come with a commitment to acting on those principles. All right, lesson number 8. This one is the toughest one, and it's the one that we are currently failing at in the U.S. pretty hard, and it's having some failures in other places as well. Academic integrity, like response to the coronavirus, requires all of us to participate. It takes a relative few of us to completely flub it up, and being responsible for each other is one of the things that is most critical, and a lesson that I think that we are learning, some of us are learning the hard way more than others. If the community decides that they want to adhere to standards of integrity, if they want to act with honesty, if they want to be able to have trust amongst and between each other, then the community is responsible for taking action, and the action can come in the form of, if you're talking about COVID-19, the action can come in the form of just asking your neighbor, say, hey, I've noticed that when I see you at the grocery store, you're not wearing a mask. I'm wearing my mask to protect you. I would really like it if you would wear your mask to protect me. It's the same for academic integrity, in which a student can say to another student, listen, I know that you're struggling with this class, but you don't have to bring crib notes in here. How about if we go study together? And again, I have some examples of where that's been done very successfully, and where students themselves take responsibility for enforcing, but more importantly, communicating about and promoting the honor code, so that it becomes a matter of student to student rather than always having the administration force it upon us. And I think that we have seen with COVID-19 that when people understand the reasons and they understand what's at stake, they are much more willing to contribute to the effort, because it really does take all of us, and it's something that we cannot solve alone. And that is absolutely the case with respect to academic integrity. We started out just talking about student cheating at ICAI, and then we went on to talk about communities, and then we started to talk about institutional norms and values, and how we really need to make it so that we reward the kind of behavior and we celebrate the kind of behavior that we want to see. And we start dismantling some of the incentives to do the wrong thing. And I think that that's the biggest lesson that we can really learn from the pandemic, is that it actually takes us all. So to summarize the parallels, we need a deep understanding, transparency, and honesty. We need those in place before the crisis hits. And we all need to know that those things are structural. The robust structural support and rigor are absolutely key to understanding the situation that we're in, and understanding it is key to addressing it. We have to be prepared, and we also have to be prepared to change. And it seems like those two things are in conflict with each other. But if you think about the ways in which you are most prepared for any crisis, they will always involve some flexibility that enable you to respond to changing conditions on the ground. We need to understand that crises reveal problems. Yes, of course, they cause some problems, but they also reveal problems that we've already had. And even though those things are often things that we don't want to see, we need to look at them squarely and be willing to address things that we thought were okay before that we now have learned are not. And the last thing, experts and leaders are absolutely crucial, but experts and leaders cannot solve problems alone. We absolutely have to have buy-in from the people, for whom academic integrity isn't their primary concern, but if we help them see that it is a concern that applies to them and that we're all responsible for our academic integrity climate, that's the way that we meet with some success. I do want to make one small note. Using disease or contagions as a metaphor for academic integrity can be problematic. I'm not going to say too much about that. I know I'm running out of time. And that's, I think, the last I have. Thank you very, very much for including me. I dearly love Ireland. Galway is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in my whole life, and I hope once this is over, I can come and visit you.